Susan Osborne thought she knew her husband, Jerry. Married in early 2014, they'd been living what appeared to be a normal life in Wetumpka, Alabama. But in January 2016, when Susan discovered Jerry's secret profile on Boyscort.com, her world shattered. She saw the same distinctive tattoos she knew from his forearm in photos advertising escort services. The man she'd trusted was allegedly living a double life as a male escort, meeting other men while she remained clueless at home. Within months of this devastating discovery, Susan and her 14-year-old son Evan vanished without a trace. Did her discovery set off a chain of events that put her and Evan in mortal danger? To understand how Susan ended up in such a vulnerable position, we need to go back to the beginning. The perfect couple that never was. After a difficult divorce left her struggling to pay bills, Susan and Evan moved in with Jerry in 2014. Jerry Osborne seemed like everything Susan needed at that moment. He was an Air Force veteran with a steady income and his own home on Waterview Lane in Wetumpka, Alabama. To Susan, he represented stability, security, and a fresh start for both her and 14-year-old Evan. Jerry offered her a way out of the financial nightmare she'd been living. He promised her a future where she wouldn't have to worry about keeping the lights on or putting food on the table. For someone who had hit rock bottom, Jerry must have seemed like a godsend. Susan and Jerry had begun dating in mid-2013, and married in January 2014. Friends noted they married just 8 months after meeting, a pattern that can signal deeper problems. When you're desperate for stability, it's easy to mistake rescue for love. Susan's friends and family noticed how quickly everything was happening, but when someone's been drowning financially and emotionally, they don't always want to hear warnings about their lifeline. The moment Susan moved into Jerry's house, something shifted. Jerry began showing behaviors that went way beyond normal relationship boundaries. He started reading Susan's text messages, monitoring every conversation she had with friends and family. That's not protective behavior, that's controlling behavior. Susan was trading one difficult situation for another, but she might not have realized it yet. Susan's best friend Holly picked up on the changes immediately after the wedding. Susan seemed different, more guarded, like she was walking on eggshells in her own home. Holly had known Susan for years, and she could see that her friend was becoming someone else entirely. The open, trusting woman she'd known was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed constantly on edge. When your closest friends notice personality changes that dramatic, it usually means something serious is happening behind closed doors. Jerry's need for control extended beyond just monitoring Susan's communications. He installed security cameras at every single door of their home on Waterview Lane. Now, you might think that's just being cautious, but consider this: Wetumpka is a quiet neighborhood where most people feel safe leaving their doors unlocked. Multiple security cameras monitoring every entrance and exit suggests someone who either has enemies or wants to keep very close tabs on who comes and goes. The cameras weren't just watching for intruders, they were watching Susan. The warning signs were piling up, but Susan was trapped by her circumstances. She'd escaped financial ruin by marrying Jerry, and now she was discovering that her rescue came with strings attached. Jerry's controlling behavior was escalating, and Susan was beginning to understand that the man she'd married wasn't the person he'd pretended to be during their courtship. The Air Force veteran who'd seemed so stable and trustworthy was revealing himself to be someone who needed to control every aspect of his wife's life. Susan's situation was becoming more complicated by the day. She had Evan to think about, and Jerry's home represented the only stability her son had known in years. Walking away would mean starting over again from nothing, but staying meant accepting Jerry's increasingly controlling behavior. Friends like Holly could see that Susan was struggling with this impossible choice, but Susan couldn't see a way out that wouldn't destroy the security she'd fought so hard to achieve. The perfect couple that Jerry and Susan appeared to be from the outside was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. Jerry had presented himself as Susan's salvation, but he was actually becoming her captor. The man who'd offered her a home and stability was systematically isolating her from the people who cared about her most. But Susan was about to stumble across something that would shatter her understanding of Jerry completely, something that would make his paranoid, controlling behavior finally make sense. The digital breadcrumbs. In January 2016, Susan discovered something on Jerry's phone that changed everything. The emails she found weren't what you'd expect from a married man, they weren't from female co-workers or old military buddies. These messages were from other men, and the content went beyond friendship, describing planned meetings and arrangements that Jerry had never mentioned to his wife. Susan's world started cracking that day, and she had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The communications Susan found painted a picture of a man she didn't recognize. Jerry had been exchanging messages with multiple men, discussing meetings and arrangements that he'd never mentioned to his wife. These weren't casual conversations about sports or work. The language was intimate, personal, and completely at odds with everything Susan thought she knew about her husband. Imagine discovering that the person sleeping next to you every night has been living an entirely different life during the day. Susan's reaction tells you everything about how earth-shattering this discovery was. She immediately forwarded screenshots of these suspicious emails to her best friend Holly Hatfield in January 2016. Terrified by what she'd found, Susan warned, "Don't mention this in text," demonstrating just how afraid she'd become. Susan knew that Jerry monitored her communications, so she had to be strategic about sharing this information. That subject line wasn't just about keeping secrets, it was about survival. The digital trail Susan uncovered revealed a pattern that would have been impossible to ignore. Jerry wasn't just having the occasional suspicious conversation. He was actively maintaining relationships with multiple men, planning meetings, and discussing arrangements that required secrecy. The emails contained references to conversations Susan had never heard, meetings Jerry had never mentioned, and a whole social network that existed completely outside his marriage. This wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness, this was a systematic double life. Jerry's behavior became even more controlling once Susan started acting differently. He seemed to sense that something had changed, that Susan was suspicious about his activities. His monitoring of her communications became more intense, and he started watching her even more closely than before. Susan was walking on eggshells, trying to process what she discovered while avoiding Jerry's growing paranoia. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary was becoming a prison. Susan stopped sleeping in the same bed as Jerry after discovering these emails, creating physical distance that matched the emotional chasm opening between them. Think about that moment, when you realize you can't bear to be physically close to someone you once trusted completely. Susan wasn't ready to confront Jerry directly about what she'd found, but she couldn't pretend everything was normal either. The marriage was fracturing, and Jerry had to notice the change. Holly Hatfield watched her best friend spiral into confusion and fear. Susan was scared about what she'd uncovered, but she was also trapped by her circumstances. She'd escaped financial ruin by marrying Jerry, and now she was discovering that her rescue came with a price she'd never imagined. Holly could see the emotional toll this discovery was taking on Susan, but there wasn't much she could do except listen and support her friend through this nightmare. The emails Susan found were just the tip of the iceberg. They revealed that Jerry had been living a secret life that required constant deception and careful planning. He'd been meeting with other men, maintaining relationships that Susan knew nothing about, and funding activities that weren't part of their shared budget. Every message Susan read painted a clearer picture of a man who was capable of extraordinary deception. If Jerry could hide something this big, what else was he capable of? Susan's investigation into Jerry's digital communications opened a door she couldn't close. She crossed a line from suspicious wife to dangerous witness, though she didn't realize it yet. The knowledge she was gaining about Jerry's secret activities was creating a problem for him, and problems like that don't just disappear. Susan was collecting evidence of behavior that could destroy Jerry's carefully constructed public image. But Susan wasn't done digging. The suspicious emails had given her a roadmap to Jerry's hidden world, and she was determined to follow it wherever it led. What she would discover next would make those troubling messages look like nothing more than a warning shot. The Boyscort revelation. Susan's investigation led her to a website called Boyscort.com, where she discovered a profile that would shatter every assumption she'd made about her marriage. The profile had been created in August 2011, but remained active throughout their marriage, and what Susan saw there changed everything she thought she knew about Jerry Osborne. The profile didn't show Jerry's face clearly, but Susan recognized him instantly anyway. How? His tattoos. She could see the distinctive gift bow tattoo on his cheek and the familiar ink on his forearm, markings she saw every single day on her husband's body. These weren't generic photos someone had stolen. This was Jerry himself, advertising services she never could have imagined. Picture that moment of recognition, when something so familiar becomes proof of something so foreign. The phone number listed on the profile was one Jerry used to have, which eliminated any possibility that this was some kind of mistake or coincidence. Susan knew that number belonged to Jerry. The profile listed a contact number and explicit service offerings, making it clear this wasn't a dating profile or social networking account. This was Jerry actively advertising himself as a male escort, meeting other men for money while Susan played the role of devoted wife at home. Susan immediately shared this explosive discovery with Holly, sending screenshots and details that proved beyond any doubt that Jerry had been operating as a male escort. The profile showed explicit information about services offered and arrangements for meetings, making it clear this wasn't some one-time experiment or moment of confusion. Jerry had been running an ongoing operation, meeting clients and earning money from activities Susan knew nothing about. The revelation hit Susan like a freight train. While she'd been worrying about household finances and trying to build a stable life for Evan, Jerry had been earning money through secret meetings with other men. The man she'd married for security and stability had been funding their lifestyle through activities that could have put their entire family at risk. Every dollar Jerry contributed to their household expenses now carried a different meaning. Here's where things get really dark. Susan realized that Jerry's controlling behavior suddenly made perfect sense. He'd been monitoring her communications and tracking her movements because he couldn't risk her discovering his double life. The security cameras at every door weren't just about protecting their home, they were about protecting Jerry's secret. His paranoid remodeling of the house, his constant need to know where Susan was and what she was doing, all of it was designed to maintain his carefully constructed deception. The Boyscort.com profile explained everything about Jerry's behavior. He wasn't just a controlling husband, he was a man living a double life who couldn't afford to have his secret exposed. Susan's discovery of his escort activities meant she now possessed information that could destroy everything Jerry had built. She knew about his clients, his methods, and his complete deception about who he really was. Susan's position became incredibly dangerous the moment she found that profile. She wasn't just dealing with an unfaithful husband anymore, she was dealing with a man who had built his entire life on deception, and who had significant financial motivation to keep his secret activities hidden. The money Jerry earned wasn't just extra income, it was a substantial part of how he maintained their lifestyle and his public image as a stable, successful Air Force veteran. The betrayal went far beyond typical infidelity. Jerry hadn't just been cheating on Susan, he'd been lying about his entire identity, his source of income, and the very foundation of their marriage. Susan had trusted him with her financial security, her son's stability, and her own emotional well-being, only to discover that the man she'd married was a complete fabrication. Susan now held information that could destroy Jerry's reputation and his ability to maintain the respectable facade he'd worked so hard to create. This knowledge made her incredibly valuable as a witness and incredibly dangerous as a threat. Jerry's entire world depended on Susan keeping quiet about what she'd discovered, but Susan wasn't the type of person who could just pretend she'd never seen that profile. She was about to make decisions that would determine whether she and Evan survived what came next. The crumbling marriage, Susan's discovery of Jerry's secret life created a dangerous game of deception that both of them had to play perfectly to survive. Armed with screenshots of Jerry's Boyscort.com profile and those incriminating emails, Susan began making moves that would determine her fate. She started searching for jobs, looking into health insurance for herself and her children, and quietly preparing for a life without Jerry's financial support. Think about the courage that took, planning an escape from a man who monitored her every text message and phone call. Susan knew she was walking on a tightrope, but she also knew she couldn't stay married to someone living such a massive lie. Jerry sensed something had shifted. His paranoia kicked into overdrive, and he began watching Susan even more closely than before. The man who had already been controlling her communications and tracking her movements became absolutely obsessed with knowing where she was and what she was doing every moment of the day. Susan was living under constant surveillance in her own home, and Jerry's behavior was escalating in ways that should have terrified anyone paying attention. The confrontations between Susan and Jerry became more intense and potentially dangerous. Picture the tension in the house on Waterview Lane, Susan trying to act normal while secretly planning her escape, and Jerry growing increasingly suspicious that his wife knew something she shouldn't. The atmosphere must have been unbearable, with both of them playing roles while knowing their marriage was built on lies. Susan was scared, but she was also determined to protect herself and Evan from whatever Jerry might do if he discovered she had evidence of his double life. During a visit to Texas, Jerry gave Susan $500 and told her to go shopping, a gesture that felt more like manipulation than generosity. The instability in their relationship reached such a breaking point that Susan was constantly on edge about Jerry's behavior and whereabouts. She had no idea what Jerry was capable of and feared the worst when situations felt unpredictable. Here's where things get really interesting. On May 16, 2017, Susan told her best friend Holly that she and Jerry had worked things out. But consider this, was Susan really reconciling with Jerry, or was she trying to buy herself time while she finished planning her escape? Someone who had discovered her husband's secret life as a male escort doesn't just work things out overnight. Susan might have been telling Jerry what he wanted to hear while secretly preparing to leave with Evan. Jerry's controlling behavior reached new heights as he monitored her communications more aggressively than ever, listening to her phone calls and reading her messages with the desperation of someone who knew his world was about to collapse. Holly could see the changes in Susan's behavior and noticed how carefully her friend had to navigate every conversation and interaction. Jerry understood that Susan possessed information that could destroy his reputation, his business, and his carefully constructed public image. He couldn't afford to let her walk away with those secrets. Susan found herself trapped in an impossible situation. She wanted to protect herself and Evan, but she also feared what Jerry might do if he knew she had concrete evidence of his escort activities. The Boyscout.com profile and those emails weren't just proof of infidelity, they were evidence of a completely false identity that Jerry had built his entire life around. Susan held the power to destroy everything Jerry had worked to create, and that made her incredibly dangerous to him. The psychological pressure on Susan must have been overwhelming. She was living with someone who had deceived her about his most fundamental identity while also trying to plan an escape that wouldn't trigger a violent reaction. Jerry's monitoring of her activities meant Susan had to be extremely careful about every conversation, every search on her phone, and every step she took toward independence. One wrong move could alert Jerry to her plans and put both her and Evan in immediate danger. By late May 2017, the marriage had reached a breaking point that would determine Susan's fate. The final days of May would prove to be the most critical time in Susan's life, as the dangerous knowledge she possessed was about to collide with Jerry's desperate need to maintain control. The Vanishing. May 29, 2017, Memorial Day, was the last time anyone heard from Susan Osborne. That morning, she had what seemed like a normal conversation with her best friend Holly Hatfield Morris. Nothing about their chat suggested anything was wrong or that Susan was planning to disappear. But by the end of that day, both Susan and 14-year-old Evan Chartrand had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would expose the deadly consequences of discovering Jerry's secret life. When Holly tried texting Susan the next day, May 30th, she got no response. This wasn't like Susan at all. The woman who had been sharing screenshots of Jerry's suspicious emails and Boyscort.com profile had suddenly gone completely silent. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, with no word from Susan or Evan. Finally, on July 29, 2017, exactly 2 months after they were last seen, Susan's family filed a missing person report. They'd waited, hoping Susan would reach out, but the silence was deafening. Jerry's explanation for his wife's disappearance raised immediate red flags with investigators. He told authorities that Susan had left with an unidentified man driving a truck on Memorial Day. According to Jerry, this mystery man was about 6 feet tall, had a beard, wore sunglasses, and never got out of the vehicle. Jerry claimed Susan returned the following day to collect furniture and belongings, but left her car behind. Investigators found Susan's car at the house, and Jerry's claim that she left with a mystery man contradicted neighbors' reports and other evidence. What woman leaves her car, her 10-year-old daughter Hannah Grace, and her 2 beloved dogs to run away with a stranger? The abandoned pets tell their own story. Susan's dogs, Sugar and Schnook, who she loved like babies, were found at an animal shelter on June 12, 2017. Jerry's father had dropped them off, claiming they couldn't care for them anymore. Susan would never have abandoned these dogs willingly. She'd fought through financial ruin and a difficult divorce, but she'd never given up her pets. The fact that Jerry's family dumped them at a shelter just weeks after Susan disappeared speaks volumes about what really happened. Here's where Jerry's behavior becomes truly damning. After his wife and stepson vanished, Jerry made absolutely no effort to contact Susan's family or friends. He showed no concern, filed no additional police reports, and made no attempts to search for them. Instead, he filed for divorce on July 5, 2017, just 6 days after the missing person report was filed. He listed his home address as Susan's service address and later sought to serve her with divorce papers through publication, claiming he'd made unsuccessful efforts to locate her. This isn't the behavior of a worried husband, this is the behavior of someone who knows exactly where his wife is. Neighbors started noticing strange activities at Jerry's house right after Memorial Day. Multiple witnesses reported seeing large, hot fires burning in Jerry's backyard for days following the disappearance. These weren't normal backyard fires, they were so intense that neighbors could feel the heat in their own yards. The smoke was both thin and heavy at different times, suggesting Jerry was burning significant amounts of different materials. What was he destroying, and why did he need to burn so much right after Susan and Evan disappeared? When police finally obtained a search warrant for the Waterview Lane house, they discovered approximately 20 possible bloodstains throughout the home. The bloodstains were only visible with luminol testing, meaning someone had tried to clean them up. They were found in the kitchen, laundry room, and guest bathroom, areas where someone might try to dispose of evidence. Jerry's explanation was that Susan had spray-painted vulgar phrases on the walls before leaving, which is why he had to repaint and remodel. But he provided no evidence to support this claim, and the bloodstains didn't match his story. The most convenient piece of evidence destruction involved the security cameras. Remember those cameras Jerry had installed at every door to monitor Susan's movements? On June 1, 2017, just days after Susan and Evan disappeared, Jerry replaced the entire security system. The footage that could have shown exactly what happened to Susan and Evan was conveniently unavailable. Jerry had eliminated the one source of evidence that could have either cleared him or convicted him. Other details paint a picture of calculated deception. Evan missed his oral surgery appointment scheduled just days after Memorial Day. Jerry provided paperwork to the dentist that made it appear Evan had attended, but it was actually a no-show bill. Susan's credit cards, phone, and social media accounts showed no activity after May 29, 2017. A woman planning to run away with a new man would have used her credit cards, answered her phone, or posted on social media. The complete digital silence suggests Susan was no longer able to use these accounts. Every piece of evidence points to one terrifying conclusion about what happened that Memorial Day weekend. Susan's dangerous knowledge had finally caught up with her, and the consequences were exactly what anyone should have feared when a desperate man's secrets are threatened with exposure. Jerry Osborne remains the sole person of interest in the disappearance of Susan Osborne and Evan Chartrand. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Luminol testing revealed approximately 20 bloodstains throughout his home, and he conveniently replaced his security camera system just days after they vanished. Jerry's extensive remodeling, including repainting and replacing flooring, further raised investigators' suspicions. The Elmore County Sheriff's Office continues investigating, but the case remains unsolved. Susan's story serves as a chilling reminder that discovering someone's double life that turned deadly can cost everything. Her family continues searching for answers about what happened that Memorial Day weekend. To discover more stories about the souls of unsolved mysteries, then be sure to like and subscribe to the channel to be notified of other videos. If you know anything about Susan or Evan's disappearance, contact the Elmore County Sheriff's Office at 334-567-5227 or Crime Stoppers at 334-251 stop.